Okay, so abolition for the people, the demand for abolition. Now, this is just as a preface. This is a very compelling case for the fact that trying for just reforms and such is not enough. And it lays out a lot of reasons why that is destined to fail and always fall short and always revert back any efforts that are made, and even in good faith. So only by dismantling unjust systems can we imagine a future that is safe, healthy, and truly free. Okay. In the wake of state-sanctioned lynchings of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, the United States has been forced to grapple with not only the devastation of police terrorism, but also the institutions that constitute, enhance, and expand the carceral state. Does not pull punches in the very opening statement. Like, that is intended to draw attention. It is a very strong initial statement. It is basically saying exactly where Colin Kaepernick wants to begin the conversation. It's not, oh, there is some police violence. It is, there is police terrorism, and we have a carceral state that is sanctioning lynchings of black people. In response, uprisings demanding the defunding of the police have spread across the country with no signs of stopping. Those who have been terrorized by law enforcement, those who have had enough of their very existence being criminalized, and those who have dedicated their lives to the cause of liberations by any means necessary are demanding the abolition of the carceral state. The institutions, structures, and practices of anti-black state-sanctioned violence that violates the fundamental humanity of black and indigenous people and people of color. Now, as we've discussed in on this channel a few times, and as we've had people on to personally testify, it's not a few bad apples. It's not a occasional problem. There are deliberate policies in place. Hey, Snake. There are deliberate policies in place to maintain the carceral state, prison-based state. As Mark Charles put it, it's a perpetuation of slavery into, rather than chattel slavery, it's now prison slaves. So, and yeah, it's very much aimed at black and indigenous people and people of color. It's been 4 years since I first protested during the Star Spangled Banner. At the time, my protest was tethered to my understanding that something was not right. I saw the bodies of black people left dead in the streets. I saw them left dead in their cars. I saw them left dead in their backyards. I saw black death all around me at the hands of the police. I saw little to no accountability for police officers who had murdered them. It is not a matter of bad apples spoiling the bunch, but interlocking systems that are rotten to the core, and systemic problems demand systemic problems demand systemic solutions. This is, especially in the face of what we just saw. Yes, one woman at the Capitol got shot. But, like, this is the testimony of people of color all around this country, that, they don't get the leniency. They don't get police who are meeting them with, a more appropriate level of force. And that's really all that was being asked for. But since that could not ever be offered, since that is resisted at every step of the way. Yeah, he's identified that it is very much inbuilt into this system. It's not an accident. It is not just bad apples spoiling the bunch. It is a rotten system. Predictably, the political mainstream has responded to recent uprisings by shifting the demands to defund the police, to reformist interventions centered on acceptable modes of enacting death and violence upon oppressed peoples. So what he's referring to here is all those things of, hey, what if we just change the training? What if we ban certain methods? Let's say they can't do chokeholds. Maybe well-intentioned, but it avoids recognizing the actual depth of the problem. As such, conventional paths and strategies for achieving justice for anti-black police terror and violence are all too often couched in campaigns and desires for convictions, punishment, and incarceration. These modes of reactionary justice fail to remedy the uninterrupted death caused by policing and prisons, and frequently leave us disheartened, disjointed, and disillusioned. Despite the steady cascade of anti-black violence across the country, I am hopeful we can build a future that imagines justice differently. A future without the terror of policing and prisons. A future that prioritizes harm reduction, redemption, and public well-being in order to create a more just and humane world. This is, of course, the balance that is always struck by any sort of law enforcement between, do you want to be punitive, or do you want to actually make the community, like, rehabilitate people and keep them healthy and moving forward as productive members of society? And it depends on your goal of your police system. In America, in particular, our police system is focused on being punitive. We're not interested in actually helping criminals stop being criminals. We actually systemically try to keep people circulating in and out of the prison system, especially black people. I also want to I have to say, the fact that he and other people of color can take this position of actually being hopeful for the future after centuries of genocidal policy aimed at them is astounding in and of itself. And I have to give respect there. Like, I don't know where my mind would be if if people that looked like me were just 4 generations, my parents and their parents and their parents beyond them had been just oppressed and murdered and enslaved. I don't know that I would be able to maintain that hope. And like on that one video segment where the one gal was saying that we should be so lucky that they just want justice and not revenge. Like, it's true. And a call for revenge would be entirely justified here. But yeah. But it is, it takes a very amazing soul and a very, I don't know, I don't know what the word is, but it is, it takes a very amazing soul and a very, 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 amaz compassionate soul to say, yeah, all of this is shit, but let's put that in the past and let's pave a new way forward. So, how do we get there? Well, first, let's, To understand the necessity and urgency of abolition, we must first understand the genesis and histories of the institutions and practices we must abolish. So this is a preface for what these essays are. Just to not be purely angry about it all the time. I know, I really am amazed by that. Abolition for the people. The movement for a future without policing and prisons is a partnership between Kaepernick Publishing, I'm probably mispronouncing, I don't know, and the Medium publication Level that builds on a rich tradition of black organizing and freedom fighting. This project seeks to introduce abolitionist values, practices, histories, and ambitions to an audience that is looking for a path to a better and more just society. Over the next 4 weeks, and this was a while ago, so these have already been published. Over the next 4 weeks, we will publish 30 essays from political prisoners, grassroots organizers, movement leaders, scholars, and family members of those affected by anti-black state violence and terrorism. Each week, we'll bring a collection centered around a different theme: police and policing, prisons and carcerality, fuck reform, and abolition now. Yeah. Hey, Garlic, yeah, we ended RimWorld. If you don't want to hang out, I understand. But if you do, you're welcome to hang out with us and be part of this discussion. I think it's an important one to have. And I think it's especially important for... So, like, one of the reasons that I feel the need to bring this, like, to my platform is this is something that especially, white people need to hear and be aware of, because this is not a system that is aimed at us, necessarily. Now, poverty is still a problem that affects us, but, like, there are very, very deliberate policies in place that are aimed at black people and such. Is the essay The Demand for Abolition? Yeah, so here's the link for it, if you want to follow along. In France, the word noir is taboo to designate a person. We use the English-American word in common discussions. Okay. Yeah. I'm using the terms currently that Colin Kaepernick himself is using for purpose of the discussion. Okay, police and policing. Noir is... so it means black. It's the word for black. Yeah. Yep, that's the color in France. And that's, the word was borrowed and adapted into the name for the film genre. Oh, poor Finia. See. Okay. Police and policing. The central intent of policing is to surveil, terrorize, capture, and kill marginalized populations, specifically black folks. It doesn't seem like that at first, but if you really think about it, if you really look at things, like, there are a lot of laws. There are a lot of laws that are aimed to do exactly this. And all of the talks that happen about needing to increase police presence and things of that nature they're always aimed at black communities. And it isn't to lower the amount of crime, because we know how to do that. We study after study has shown how to actually reduce crime. It's not to throw people in jail over and over again. That doesn't reduce crime. It never has, and we know that. I wanted to pause on this statement because it's one that I think a lot of people might have a reaction to. Yeah. Yeah, basically, though. It's like a detective type movie usually, or is often told in that way. It has like a narration, usually of the main character. Anyway, in her edited collection, Imprisoned Intellectuals, Joy James put the United States under the magnifying glass. The world can see what goes on in the tombs of America as black people are being slowly strangled and suffocated to death, she writes. When the world witnessed the police choke Eric Garner to death as he gasped, "I can't breathe," that is an act of terror. When a cop car pulled up to Tamir Rice, a 12-year-old boy, and the cop shot him in less than 2 seconds, that is an act of terror. When the police broke down 92-year-old Katherine Johnston's front door, unloaded 39 rounds, and left 5 bullets buried in her body, that is an act of terror. We recognize it as anti-black violence and control, while law enforcement and the injustice system see it as essential to the very nature of the job. Yeah, AJ. So, what they claimed was they saw Tamir Rice, a 12-year-old boy, brandishing a gun. He didn't have a gun, of course. He was a 12-year-old. He was playing outside. But they pulled up, they got out of the car, yelled at him and opened fire literally in 2 seconds. He did not even have time to show his hands before he was executed. It is, yeah. Right. And this, this, again, I keep saying, they can't keep using lethal force. They can't be allowed to. It can't be an option to them. Yeah, they do. They perceive every black person as a imminent threat that must be killed, or that must have some degree of violence leveled at them. Yeah, they can't. They can't. But again, this is the central intent of policing in America. Policy and all of their legal protections and the way that they use police unions all reinforce this central point. And it's important to say that it is aimed at marginalized populations, specifically black folks, because they do just enough PR work to keep a large section of the white population thinking, and I include myself in this, there was a period where I bought into the propaganda, thinking that they are out there keeping us safe from criminals. Instead, they're just manufacturing criminals and killing people, and they write the reports so they get to say what's actually happening, and the rest of us just eat it up. And yeah, I am, ashamed to admit that it took me a while to let go of that, but it's the propaganda is very strong. And so, yeah, this is part of why we have these discussions, and why I feel it's really important to bring this out to anyone who hasn't read these yet, because this is stuff that's going on. Okay. The political project of anti-blackness has always been central to the enforcement of laws and legal codes in the United States. Sally E. Haddon's Slave Patrols, Law and Violence in Virginia and the Carolinas lays out an irrefutable case that slavery and policing are linked both in logic and philosophy. South Carolina's 1701 Act for a Better Ordering of Slaves in 1701 declared that any enslaved African resisting a white person could be beaten, maimed, assaulted, or killed if they resisted or took flight. He lists in each of these cases a recent case where these things happened. Rodney King in 1991 was beaten, as I remember that very well. Jacob Blake, we've talked about him very recently, especially the fact that those who shot him in the back and paralyzed him got off the hook. Marlene Pinnock in 2014. I hate to say that I'm unfamiliar with this one. Corey Gaines, killed for resisting, and Rayshard Brooks for running. There are so many options available that, like, if you run from cops, like, they should not be shooting you in the back. They can follow you. They can arrest you later if there is cause to. They can do so safely, without maiming you, without risking people around you. Because a lot of these cases, it wasn't, an isolated situation, and bullets could have gone flying elsewhere, hitting other people. And that's if you even believe that they should have been engaged by the police in the first place. Which, spoilers, they shouldn't. Jacob Blake was literally just leaving a domestic dispute he had tried to diffuse, and just was trying to leave the scene to go to his car, and was shot in the back and paralyzed for it. This is sorry, getting off on a tangent there. What he's alluding to here, though, with pointing to Sally Hayden's work, is that the system by which law enforcement is built was rooted in recapturing slaves, or in suppressing slaves that were acting out. Like, that's the original foundation of police in this country. That is what was actually established as a police system in this country. And upon that, other things have been built. But it's hard to escape that origin. I would say we haven't escaped that origin. Anyway, the more that I've learned about the history and evolution of policing in the United States, the more I understand its roots in white supremacy and anti-blackness. Black Panther Party co-founder Huey Newton once said, "The police are in our community not to promote our welfare or for our security and our safety, but they're there to contain us, to brutalize us, and murder us." The ever-present threat of premature death at the hands of knees, chokeholds, tasers, and guns of law enforcement has only further ingrained its anti-black foundations into the institutions of policing. In order to eradicate anti-blackness, we must also abolish the police. The abolition of one without the other is impossible. So this is where Kaepernick, makes the case, and starts with the premise of just like doing piecemeal reforms is not enough. The system is broken. It has to be abolished and rebuilt in a different vision. Prisons and carcerality. As part of the reentry work I've done with Kevin Livingston from 100 Suits for 100 Men. Rikers Island, I have spent time with the young black men no older than 20. The young men there explained the dehumanizing conditions in the prison that range from denial of literature to physical assault. They have been criminalized and caged in most cases for being redlined into economic despair. Forever emblazoned in my memory are the words of one of the young black men, "You love us when no one else does." The young brother was seeking love. He was seeking care. He was seeking a space that valued his life. What he received was hate and what Ruth Wilson Gilmore would call organized abandonment. So, I'm unfamiliar with this writing itself or the 100 Suits for 100 Men, but what is being referred to here is, by certainly the being redlined, is the systemically enforced economic poverty, forcing people into poverty and then criminalizing being in poverty. And we do see that in a increasingly widespread way in this country. And we see it in how set up districting for schools and for where businesses go. We see it in how we still segregate our housing. We set people up to fail, especially black people, and then we keep them in perpetual prison where, they are treated like shit. And again, it goes to the question of who is that serving? Who is that protecting? What is... If the intent of the police system, if its mission were a noble one, would that be happening? I don't think so. I think its unwritten mission is what was said above. To explicitly target marginalized communities with surveillance and violence. And to take an institution based on social control instead of social well-being is an institution that needs to be abolished, and this is true. Kind of sticking with that again for a little bit before I continue reading. A large number of the dispatches, it is something we've talked about on this channel several times. Huge numbers of dispatches of police. Police are the wrong tool for the job. Sending an armed thug with a gun out to handle domestic disputes, to handle someone who's being drunk, who's drunk, to handle, even to respond to a robbery that's already happened. To handle someone who seems strung out on drugs. In all of these cases, they can't actually help. They cannot contribute to improving the situation when they get there. The most they could possibly do is take a statement because they're not trained in any of those situations. They are trained at inflicting violence. But in none of those situations does anyone actually need violence inflicted on them. There's people that just need help. So, the only thing that police can actually do is offer social control. They do not actually contribute to any social well-being or the tools that they choose to arm everyone with. Anyway. And again, I'm just kind of rolling. I'm just kind of talking through it. If anyone has any thoughts or wants to interrupt or chime in, please don't hesitate. I'm just kind of going. So Angela Y. Davis has written, prisons do not disappear problems, they disappear human beings. Prisons do not contain a criminal population running rampant, but rather a population that society has repeatedly failed. Uprisings in response to the hellish conditions black folk have been forced to live in, both in and out of prison, have been criminalized as well. In her book, Are Prisons Obsolete?, Davis effectively analyzes the purpose of prisons. These prisons represent the application of sophisticated modern technology dedicated entirely to the task of social control. And they isolate, regulate, and surveil more effectively than anything that has preceded them. An institution based on social control instead of social well-being is an institution that needs to be abolished. Yeah. That really is such a central thing. When you're like that really is it. You have to look at what a system is actually contributing. What tools does it bring to the table, and what skills does it bring? What change does it affect? And if it is just controlling people, especially if it's controlling a particular, marginalized group of people, and it is not actually making anyone's lives better, what good is that? So, fuck reform. And I think this is where things really need to start being heard, because especially, through the media and such, everyone wants to softball this problem and say, we can just tweak things. We can just make some changes and improve things to the state where they will be acceptable. And so Kaepernick's going to make the case that is not going to be enough. I recently visited the 2016 post-game interview when I was first asked about not standing during the Star-Spangled Banner. One of the reporters inquired about the reasoning behind my dissent. There's a lot of things that need to change, I replied. One specifically is police brutality. There's people being murdered unjustly and not being held accountable. Cops are getting paid leave for killing people. That's not right. That's not right by anyone's standard. Unconsciously, my critique of police terrorism was fastened to a reformist framework. My want for accountability focused on the cops receiving convictions and punishment, not acquittals and paid vacations, but I had missed the larger picture. The focus on individual punishment will never alter the outcome of a system rooted in Black Death. I wanted change. I wanted it to stop. I wanted to reform what I saw, yet the reforms often proposed, use of force policies, body cameras, more training, and police accountability, were the same recycled police reforms consistently proposed in the past. And in both the past and the present, these reforms have done nothing to stop the actions that force us to say their names. So, this is something that, and I just have to say, there's a documentary called The 13th, which really gets into this, this problem, where these exact policies that he's outlining here, they sound good on paper, and they have been suggested, sometimes enforced, sometimes not. It's never really had an appreciable effect on police violence. And yeah, that documentary, if you haven't seen it, I do recommend giving it a watch, because it does outline very much that. Similarly, suggested prison reforms, new jail construction to address overcrowding and dehumanizing living conditions, technological monitoring that essentially creates open-air prisons, have not and cannot eliminate the harm of the carceral state. The thread that ties all of these reforms together is the increased investment of capital into the carceral state. There's money to be made with it. Yeah. I watched an interview with Ruth Wilson Gilmore on geographies of racial capitalism. In it, she said that capitalism requires inequality, and racism enshrines it. It made me think about the economic exploitation, deprivation, and captivity that propel forward incarceration and the construction of prisons. These economies disproportionately target black, brown, and poor white people. It made me think about how the carceral state is central to the machinery of racial capitalism. I began to ask myself the question, what is being reformed and reformulated? So yeah, this is actually really a really good point. And it's one that I hadn't thought about until I read this. Like, I've known, of course, that we have like private prisons and for-profit prisons and stuff, and that's always been a problem. But like, more to the point, overcrowding creates demand to produce more prisons. Fabricating a criminal population generates demand for more police stations and more police. These things demand capital, demand investment. They make money. And that is the point. They're designed to do that. And the ones who are often the ones who are making these reform propositions are ones actually who stand to profit off of them. If you go digging into it, which, yeah, I recommend doing that. We might do a fun dive into the economics of that sometime on this channel, because it's a very dark rabbit hole. But yeah, he posed the question, what is being reformed or reformulated? I realized that seeking reform would make me an active participant in reforming, reshaping, and rebranding institutional white supremacy, oppression, and death. This constant reinterrogation of my own analysis has been part of my political evolution. And this quote actually brings me back to that interview that we listened to from James Baldwin, where he was quoted saying something along the lines of that, black people were being asked to kind of participate in or cheerlead in their own oppression, effectively, through some of the systems that are in place. Which that should tell you how long some of these problems have existed, since that was from like the 60s and now it's 2021 and the needle hasn't really moved. And, obviously the problems existed long before that, but that's just an observation. One should recall that the movement for reforming the prisons, for controlling their function, is not a recent phenomenon. Michael Foucault wrote in Discipline and Punish. It does not even seem to have originated in a recognition of failure. Prison reform is virtually contemporary with the prison itself. It constitutes, as it were, its program. Reform at its core preserves, enhances, and further entrenches policing and prisons into the United States social order. Abolition is the only way to secure a future beyond anti-black institutions of social control, violence, and premature death. And just as a note, even if someone cynically, a white person cynically thinks that maybe it's okay to just turn a blind eye because it's anti-black institutions, it's not always just going to be anti-black. It will expand to just the lower class in general. Don't think that you're going to get off easy just because at the moment you're slightly higher on the pecking order. That's not how these systems work. It needs an underclass, and when it chews up and spits out one, it will designate a new one. So that's just a word of warning. I don't expect anyone in this channel to have those sort of sentiments, but it's just one that one should keep in mind. Even as a white person, I've got more in common with the oppressed black man than I do the police. That's where my sympathies should lie, then, the ones that I have more in common with. Anyway, abolition now. Abolition is a means to create... Now, actually, I want to pause here real quick. I'm pausing a lot. But I really like... there's an interesting kind of echo. There's an interesting historic parallel. And I don't know if it was intentional, but I love language. You want to pause me here, Snake? I love kind of plays on language. And again, I don't know if this was intentional, but like the abolitionist movement initially was the movement to abolish slavery. They are kind of rebranding the abolitionist movement, effectively saying slavery never ended, and they're implying it correct. They're implying that, and they're correct. Here they're saying abolish the police and prisons, but that's actually the same as saying abolish slavery. Like it really is a continuation of that movement, of the abolitionist movement. So I don't know if calling this the abolitionist movement was intentional, like was an intentional callback, but I imagine it probably was. And yeah, I like that. I like that that parallel. I think it's effective. So anyway, abolition is a means to create a future in which justice and liberation are fundamental to realizing the full humanity of communities. Practices of abolitionists are focused on harm reduction, public health, and the well-being of people. Now, obviously, we have a lot of problems with even just saying that people deserve health care here. We definitely don't believe that people deserve well-being. We think that you can only get it if you can pay for it. And harm reduction, well, we just outlined a whole bunch of people where, even as much as a 12-year-old boy can get shot in the face. So, yeah, I think these sorts of practices are desperately needed. Anyway, demands to defund the police and prisons are one of the ways to first realize the goals of investing in people and divesting from punishment, and in time, progress to the complete abolition of the carceral state, including police and policing. He does recognize that it will take time, that it's something that will need to be transitioned into, that you can't just disappear the system, but that you have to get the building blocks in place to make it obsolete. To be clear, the abolition of these institutions is not the absence of accountability, but rather the establishment of transformative and restorative processes that are not rooted in punitive practices. By abolishing policing and prisons, not only can we eliminate white supremacist establishments, but we can create space for budgets to be reinvested directly into communities to address mental health needs, homelessness, houselessness, access to education, and job creation, as well as community-based methods of accountability. This is a future that centers the needs of the people, a future that will make us all safer, healthier, and truly free. In the USA, universal basic income has been talked about and largely gets shot down. It's a long way off before we could implement anything like that. I mean, Republicans would lose their minds. We can't even get like financial aid during this COVID-19 crisis, Lou. Like, they were able to barely squeeze out a $600 stimulus check, and that's long after the previous stimulus check from the summer. So, yeah, as things are now, yeah, that's unfortunately not in the cards. But yeah, this is obviously kind of the fundamentals of the defund the police idea. Take the millions and millions and millions of dollars, stop putting them into just social control. Stop putting them into having jackboot thugs cracking down on the population and putting people in cages. That doesn't help anyone. Instead, address the actual. I mean, what this is a laundry list of root causes of crime, right? Help with mental health. Make sure that people are not homeless and houseless. Make sure people have access to education. Make sure people have access to some means, as well as community-based methods of accountability. And that means, yeah, having... So this is basically, if these things were actually addressed, there would not be nearly, like, it would cut down on the overwhelming majority of crime. Obviously, some might still happen, but most is driven by desperation. Let's see, Lou, at least someone talk of it. Yeah, I think it was Andrew Yang kind of... Yeah, he was the one who was kind of championing universal basic income. So at least it is being talked about, but which is, you know, more than it was previously. Let's see. Over the next month, my hope is that you, the reader, will have confronted the white supremacist underpinnings of policing and prisons and the state-sanctioned oppression, destruction, and execution of Black and Indigenous people and people of color. You will understand the ways that reform has further legitimized policing and prisons into society. You will learn about the ways that abolishing police and prisons can create a society able to invest in the well-being of the people. My sincere hope is that you will be forced to make a moral choice by the time you finish these essays. Will you continue to be actively complicit in the perpetuation of these systems, or will you take action to dismantle them for the benefit of a just future? This moment in history will not be forgotten, nor will the actions that you and I and others take. Another world is possible. A world grounded in love, justice, and accountability. A world grounded in safety and good health. A world grounded in meeting the needs of the people. Abolition now. Abolition for the people. So that was his kind of closing remarks. And this is the first of 30 essays. And it was kind of just setting the tone and establishing the base premise of these 30 essays. It's a very, very powerful and compelling message that an argument that is being made by Kaepernick here, and as we'll see from the many contributors to this series. So, does anyone have thoughts about this so far? On, obviously, even if you are still kind of on the fence about abolition, there's 29 essays left to convince you. This is really just the introductory essay. But I think it was a very powerful one. I like that it came out very combative. Not like mean, but like he didn't pull punches. He was laying out his case very, like, right from the get-go. Very first line, you know, state-sanctioned lynchings of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd. United States have been forced to grapple with not only devastation of police terrorism, but also the institutions that constitute, enhance, and expand the carceral state. And I do think that there definitely is truth to it. That the more... When did all of these writings come out? This was put together last year. I think started in September, I want to say. Maybe October. I don't recall exactly. But all of the essays are up. And I'm going to be reading and kind of talking through one of these every week until we get through all of them. Or, yeah, every week. Because I think they're important. And, you know, I could just link them and and I have linked them. But not everyone likes to read as much as I do. Sometimes people want to hear it. You know, I don't mind being an audiobook for this stuff. And I don't, I think there's some value in having a conversation around them as well. So, what is reading? No, I get it. Like, there's so much out there. And, you know, even those of us who are constantly up on current events, sometimes it's hard to just take a step back and look at past events. And these are things that are still happening, but like this is an examination from someone who's had his nose in it for quite a while. Like Colin Kaepernick is, he's a hero, but he's been arguing for this and being publicly crucified for it for years, despite being a hero. Those who don't learn from the past are doomed to repeat it. Absolutely, Vegas. Absolutely. Also, hi, Vegas. How's your egg? Yeah. I think it also helps to. So, a lot of times I'm sharing my thoughts, but I mean, who the hell am I? I'm like a white middle class cishet guy who has a reasonably well paying job. I'm not the person on the receiving end of this stuff, so it's much more compelling to actually get the voice and thoughts of people who live this. This is their lived experience. So that's why I have been trying to, amplify those voices like Kaepernick's here, more than just giving my own thoughts on things.